Don't we have special courts who handle financial
I was
issues?
coming to that.
Special courts, not from the normal courts,
now,
like the high courts that we have,
Balaji,
but special courts for the purpose of financial
now you have preempted me.
Prudence.
Now you have preempted me. I'm very quick to say that if central bank wants to get serious with dealing with this issue, since the advent of AMCOM in 2009 up to now, I had expected to see a very tough policy measure to deal with this issue. And one of them for me should be to institute, through an act, a proper act, a special court. We had similar things in the past, that even though we have acts, the Money Laundering and Corruption Act that, should support that process, we should have special courts with judges who are well trained in financial intelligence, financial markets, banking and all of that, who will give speedy attention, knowledgeable and speedy attention to these cases. So that we can begin to have these gamers who game the financial system be held responsible to pay back their debts. And until such a time when we have that kind of court, what we see in normal judicial process can never solve this problem. You enter the court with a customer. In fact, some of the cases I handle for my former employer, they have not even gone halfway in the matter, and the banks get tired and abandon the issues. You find that because you have an ongoing pressure to make more money.
And the banks will lose.
The banks will lose, and customers eventually get back on their feet and keep running, and they laugh at these banks. So, and they know that they can hold the banks in the jugular, and they hold them on there in the court for more than 10, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, no judgment is given. And in the end, banks are impatient to move on with their life.
Do you think, I'm just thinking, do you think that there should be a law, maybe an act, somehow, we have several acts in the financial markets now, an act guiding lending in the banking sector?
There are already acts.
There should be
the CBN
to control how you lend, how you borrow.
We have
within the space of years, you're supposed to pay back, or months, and the penalties that can be meted out to those who default and refuse to pay back.
Well, trust me, Nigeria is not wanted when it comes to acts. We have plenty acts that are not even being implemented, even in the financial industry. We have BOFIA, we have CBN Act, we have several of them. No recovery and all of those. But how much of attention do we give to these acts?
Are they functioning?
Who will make them function? It is the regulatory authorities and, of course, the law enforcement agencies that will ensure that these acts are implemented. When you lend, the different kinds of loans have different kinds of agreements and methods of repayment. The way you repay an overdraft is different from the way you repay a term loan. And, of course, the other issues in contingent, contingent liability and so on. So, when you enter into a loan agreement with a customer or between a customer and a bank, there are clearly defined terms and conditions and obligations of both parties. It's when these terms are not being kept that you can say that a loan is getting delinquent. By prudential guideline, in fact, from as early as 90 days, if a customer is not able to meet his obligation, either a principal repayment or interest or both, that loan begins to get gradually delinquent. So these agreements are there. It is just for us to be able to enforce these agreements. When there's a breach, from 90 days you can have a breach in a loan agreement. But the issue is that how assured are financial institutions that they can get just judgment, in the law courts if there's a breach and they go for redress through the legal system. Because they find that they can't get this, banks are now looking for several other ways, sometimes for funny ways, to make recoveries. And when you hit...
What kind of funny ways?
Well, people have, don't say that I told you. People use some unorthodox ways, talking about hiring some, in quote, recovery agents. Some of them use professional means, while some use some not so professional means, let me put it that way, to go for these recoveries. And sometimes they succeed. But there are banks too who, for ethical or business ethics reasons, decide not to use those means to go for their money.
Okay, I know that there's been changes in the economy in terms of foreign exchange volatility may have crept in on some of these funds, and so you have to pay back with more interest thereabout. And I know that the situation in the economy could warrant some of these bank debtors to say, oh, we need to renegotiate our repayment process, I mean. Now, are there no collaterals which these banks can fall back to? Perhaps, because if you're coming to borrow money from the banks, you have to present one or two assets to say, okay, these are my collaterals, just in case I default, or I'm not able to pay back as and when due. You can take back your money by selling off these assets. Are the banks having challenges in that respect?
Okay, before I go to answer the question on collateral, let me just support the point you made about the situation in the foreign exchange market. And I want to drop this point quickly, that is a recipe for more delinquency in the financial system.
Is that an excuse more like?
No, not an excuse. I'm just saying that's also already a bubble, another bubble waiting to burst. Many businesses, as we speak, are locked out from the financial system in terms of being able to access foreign exchange to facilitate even already extant business transactions. Some transactions they would have started some months or weeks ago that they cannot now conclude because they have been shut out of the FX market. While we enjoy the short-term benefit of that that policy by CBN, whereby we've seen Naira gain against the dollar, I'm afraid that in the medium to long term, the full weight of negative consequences of that policy may begin to haunt this economy. Well, I'm not here to give a solution to how that will be resolved, but I just want to note that that's going to cause more problems in the system. Now, in terms of collateral, the laws governing lending requires, in fact, in BOFIA, it's required that financial institutions must not lend without collateral. So it is the onus or the obligation of financial institutions or lenders to ensure that their loans are well collateralized. But in actual practice, on the ground, in reality, you find that it's not always convenient for several reasons, which I may not state here. It may not always be realistic to demand collateral from every borrower.
Really?
There are some borrowers that don't give you collateral. In fact, there's some popular way we say it, for corporate bodies, blue chip companies that are very big, most times lend through what they call negative pledge. In a negative pledge, they're not giving you a collateral. They're only assuring you that all my assets are free from any encumbrance. I have not pledged them to any lender, so neither will I pledge them to you. But because I'm big, please lend to me without a collateral, but have a pledge that my assets are free of any encumbrance.
But the banks are breaking the laws guiding lending.
Well, negative pledge,
they do not get collateral, so back up the lending that they are into.
No, in a way, negative pledge has been termed to be a kind of collateral. But I'm saying, in substance, you are not secured in that loan transaction.
And in a case of a default, what does the bank do?
They will all gather together, maybe appoint a receiver manager to gather the assets of this company if they still exist. If they have not flown away, of course, the floating asset might float and leave the company. But while the assets are still there, some that you can find, you can sit around the table and agree on how to handle and appropriate the assets to be able to repay the loans. So, but that's a very, even though it's compulsory that you must lend to those kind of companies, because if you don't lend to them, by right, in the financial market, they can disintermediate the banks, by using instruments that we call commercial papers to borrow directly from the markets.
Okay.
So that's standard practice everywhere in the world. I have to say this.
All right. Okay. It's very interesting to note that majority of those loans are in the oil and gas sector, and that's another source of worry for the financial expert like you.
Okay. If you had allowed me,
given the dwindling price of oil in the international market, we're seeing that the amount of money is being made in that sector has dropped because of what is going on globally. So it kind of puts the banks in a tight corner.
Okay, yeah. Now you've said this, you will just quickly give me 2 minutes to run down this list, because the next point I was going to make, why do we have this, delinquency coming up now and then? Again, the next point I was going to make before we, had a break the last time is credit concentration risk. Credit concentration risk is a major risk in banking, where you find that because not many sectors of the economy are prospering at equal level, banks tend to focus their lending on one of those two sectors that are doing very well. And we tend to have a high level of credit concentration. And, prior to the financial crisis in 2008, banks were concentrating their loans mainly on two sectors. The stock market, well, the financial sector, where margin lending became, a huge gamble, a huge pie. People were making, money, like crazy in months. And then there was huge, of course, you remember that was just immediately after the Soludo's powerful consolidation of the banking sector. Banks had a lot of liquidity, a lot of capital, and then there were not enough, safe avenues to lend them out. And banks began to concentrate their credit on, margin lending, and then again, oil and gas sector, because that's about the most viable sector in the economy here. And then what happened? During the meltdown, these two sectors had a very big bang. the margin, the stock market, we all are witnesses how it crashed like a pack of cards. And then the oil sector also had the same problem we're having right now, where oil prices dropped significantly. And that also affected banks heavily. So the same thing is almost trying to repeat, only that now, the concentration is now more on oil and gas. The margin loan is not getting much attention at this point in time. So now let me also mention again that the other factors that also cause these loans is insider abuse. I mentioned that when I talked about some guys knowing directors, or sometimes too, directors also borrow this money through their own companies.
All right.
These are all issues, and of course, the credit bureau system, which we may talk about, you know, later.
Our time is really fast spent on this issue, but the way forward, in 1 minute.
The way forward.
What do you think the bank should do? They've named, they've shamed, but without really work, without really achieve the results that we all want to see.
Name and shame will work for those who game the financial system. Those who have the capacity to repay, but they don't have the willingness to. That's character problem. If you name and shame them, they may run to quickly pay off, especially when they want to be seen as big boys in the economy. But for those genuine businessmen who are struggling to make ends meet, name and shame may actually bring more emotional trauma that may exacerbate the recovery process. Having said that, I would want to say that to reverse this trend, banks must begin to aggressively, you know, equip their, you know, credit analysts and lenders with proper skills through training. Banks must institute credit policy guide that must guide their lending process, clearly defined process that must be driven from top down, from the executive directors or the board of the bank down to the last level to ensure that things are done properly. Every loan must be approved through the, whether it's coming through the MD or the last person, it must go through the whole process and be transparent. And then the CBN must do something about this recovery process. AMCON is not going to exist in perpetuity. If it does, there are several risks to that. If banks believe that, you know, once we behave badly, we have somebody that will, you know,
buy the debts, buy the bad debts.
It becomes promoting bad behavior in banking.
Okay.
What about bad behavior in agriculture and other? Who will pay off for them?
All right.
So then the judicial process must be made effective.
Okay.
Special courts should be instituted properly instituted court by our learned, men of the bench. All right, to ensure that these cases are given speedy trial, so that gamers will not leverage on inability to redress breach of contract and be gaming the system.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Orji Udemezue, you said quite a lot, and this is a developing story. We hope to get back to it.
I'm always available.
Going by the unfolding issue that we're getting. We're seeing reactions from those who have been accused of borrowed from the bank. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.